So question number 2 is about the GDP per capita. You need to know how to calculate the GDP per capita. Question number 2 asks you, based on the table above, how fast does total output have to grow in order to raise per capita GDP in the United States? So the total output means the GDP. So this question is to ask you how fast the GDP need to grow in order to make sure the per capita GDP will increase. In order to answer this question, I need to refresh your memory on how to calculate the GDP per capita. So the GDP per capita equal to the GDP divided by the population times 100%. So that is a formula we need to use to calculate the GDP per capita. Only know this equation not enough, because on this table we cannot see the value for GDP or capital or population. Everything we can see here is, notice here. Make sure you read the question carefully. The table is about the average growth rate, so it's not the GDP per capita. That is the growth rate of GDP per capita. For instance, 2.0, that is the GDP growth rate. Compare 1999 to 2009 and 2000. And so the GDP in the United States increased 2%, and the population increased 1.1%, and the per capita GDP increased 0.9. So what is the relationship between the growth rate of GDP, growth rate of population, and growth rate of the per capita GDP? In order to understand the relationship, we need to do some transformation of the original formula. So now let's think about the GDP, the growth rate of the GDP per capita. In order to get this value, what you need to do is the GDP per capita in 2009 divide the GDP per capita in 2000 and divide by GDP per capita in 2000, right? So this is the formula we should use to calculate the growth rate of GDP per capita. But we can do a little bit of transformation, and we can easily figure out the relationship between the growth rate of GDP per capita and the growth rate of GDP, growth rate of population. So by a certain transformation, we will find the growth rate of GDP per capita equal to the GDP in 2009 minus GDP in 2000, and parentheses, don't forget parentheses, divide by GDP in 2000, and divide by population in 2009 minus population in 2000 in the parentheses, and divide by population in 2000. So now you can find, wow, this looks so familiar, the numerator and denominator. Yes, you're right. So for the numerator, if you look carefully, you will find it's trying to calculate the growth rate of GDP. And how about the denominator? So the denominator is trying to calculate the growth rate of population. So now you know the relationship between the growth rate of GDP per capita and the growth rate of the GDP, growth rate of the population. So now we can look at this formula. GDP divided by the growth rate of population. So if we look at this transformed for equation, and we will find if we want to have the GDP per capita increase, we need to make sure the growth rate of the GDP is larger than the growth rate of population. So that is the basic threshold. Now you can go back to look at the question again. So the question is ask you how fast does total GDP have to grow in order to raise per capita GDP in the United States. So this is to say in order to increase the growth rate of GDP, we need to make sure the growth rate of GDP is larger than the growth rate of population. So now the growth rate for per capita GDP is 0.9. In order to raise this number, we need to make sure the GDP is grow faster than 2.0, right? So the answer for this question is the GDP need to grow at least 2.0. Because you want to make sure this number increase, so your growth rate of GDP should increase. So that is 2.0 should increase. So that at least 2.0. So you can use the same idea to answer the question on the Cengage Now homework.